Josh, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here in the in our speaker interviews for the NLP Global Summit. Obviously, we're going live on the 19th to the 21st. So anyone who's watching this who hasn't yet got their tickets, then we need to make sure that everyone has got access to these amazing speakers and authors that we've brought together. So Josh, you're joining me from New Jersey. And I'd like you just to tell our members who you are and how you got started with your NLP journey.
Sure. Well, first of all, Fran, thank you again for having me. I'm really so happy to be part of a small part of this amazing summit you're having next week. And we connected, of course, through a book I had written. And just by background, I actually, by profession, I was a real estate professional for about 25 years. That's been my profession, but I think my passion has been more in personal growth and development. And we had connected through a book I had written, really that started, I say 2 years ago, but it was really over the past 25 years where I had read a lot of personal growth and development books, a lot of self-help books. And I felt that I needed to discover something within me. And so what I created was an unself-help book, which allowed us to kind of dig a little deeper to understand some fundamentals and principles that are, I think, familiar to all of us, and they could be useful in both our personal lives and professional lives as well.
Fantastic. And just tell our audience, what was the name of your book?
Sure. So the book was called The Unicorn in You. It was released earlier this year, and I've been so pleased, but really gratified by how much it has resonated with people. For me, I say this, unfortunately, a little selfishly, I wrote the book for myself. 2 years ago, I guess almost 2.5 years ago, in March of 2020, I think like many people, I was feeling a great deal of anxiety and really confusion and didn't know what would be ahead of us. And we were chatting, and certainly what folks in Melbourne, around the world had to deal with was much more than us just out of New York City. But I think that the fears were somewhat universal. And that was, how do we develop this sense of being rather than doing that allows us to settle into what is more of a foundation for being? And for me, what I discovered was I wanted to develop a sense of peace and joy. And that feeling was really lightness. But in order to be light, I first had to be solid. And so that's how this idea of these fundamentals came to be. And I look forward to sharing them certainly more next week. But today we'll chat a little bit about, what we both discovered in our journeys the past couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking, weren't we, a little bit sort of off camera around, the uncertainty that has occurred during that time. And I know sort of the practices and the processes that we all have to hand with our NLP skills have certainly helped me through that process. And I know sort of from reading your book as well, as you said, an unself-help book was, and I loved the unicorn and how on trend are unicorns at the moment. Everyone loves unicorns. And I think, that whole connection. And I think with everything that's happened through, I'm not even going to mention the C word here, because I think that's like, that the uncertainty that's been developed through that. But all of these concepts that we're using that you've covered in your book, and I'm sure you're going to be covering in your presentation, it are just so phenomenal to, for people to be able to take these parts of things and actually help them too. And that's what we're all about, isn't it?
Exactly. Absolutely right. And I so appreciate that sentiment, because I think we all have been looking for ways in which just to give us this feeling of calm in many ways. I always thought of balance and harmony was something that I could feel inside, and I really didn't know how to necessarily structure that. And I think this idea of an unself-help approach, one is this notion that it just shouldn't feel like a process so much. If I do this, then I have to do that, and it feels very complex. But on the other hand, I felt the word unself was appropriate because it had so much to do with selflessness, about getting our own heads and making it less about ourselves. And so that's been something that, as I started to dig in a little bit and understanding the principles, and in many ways sort of prompt people to say, what are the principles in your life that matter? For me, this really started using the unicorn, as you mentioned. And by the way, I see unicorns everywhere. And I think it's just by having this symbol that is so, It's colorful, it's bright, it's vibrant, it's symbolic of our greater potential in many ways. But to me, it's become so powerful. And so I think it's maybe sort of prompted people to say, okay, what matters to you? Because I was asked the question just a few months before I wrote this book, what in your life do you know for sure? What do you know to be true? What's your North Star? And I love that idea of a North Star. I hadn't really thought about it like that. And that's how I discovered my first principle, which I'll kind of tease, was kindness.
Yeah.
But it's the type of thing where I think it's a great question for everyone. What's your non-negotiable? What do you know absolutely? And how could you maybe start with that? And that allows us to feel a greater sense of peace and joy.
I love that. And, and I think it's one of the things that maybe we don't, until we stop and start to reflect, we don't think about those things.
Right.
We're not necessarily aware of what guides us. And I think that's been one of the things that being able to stop a little bit. I don't know about your life, but my life sort of pre-March 2020 was crazy. I spent my life on a plane, traveling the world, airport lounges, hotels, but not really thinking about what was happening. It was just, you do it because I was doing it. I was on this treadmill. And all of the time that we've had, although we were the most locked down city here in Melbourne, actually having that time to reflect and start to look at what is truly important. And I think there's been a universal shift in, not just people that are in the, using the modalities that we use and, training in the kind of things that we train, but I think in like the populace of the world in its entirety, there's been a shift, because maybe people are beginning to think about what is truly important.
You used a word twice in there that I love, and I think that a lot of people are not in tune enough to reflect, exactly as you said, this idea of reflection. And like you, I think in many ways, I was kind of like on automatic and just, you mentioned this treadmill, but we don't stop and necessarily develop a greater sense of perspective, greater sense of awareness. And that all is driven by reflection. And how do we tell ourselves that sometimes we have to take a little bit better stock, some more inventory of what's going on in our lives, maybe slow down. That certainly was a goal of mine, I think 2 years ago, where I told myself my movements just had to be even slower.
Nice.
Even speaking had to be slower, everything, because it gained for me a greater sense of perspective about things. It would allow me to hear better as well as listen better, the distinction between those two things.
Nice.
And reflection allows us to do so much more in our lives, where I think more than anything else, we appreciate.
Oh, yes. Yes, I love that. And it's true, because when you're running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, I think we do lose perspective. We do lose the ability to appreciate the things that are around us, because we don't look, we don't see, and we don't listen. And I know for me, that was absolutely true. 5 children, businesses, the world was mental. And I think, being able to really slow down, I love that. I love that concept. It's great,
yeah, it's something that's been very altering for me. And you triggered, I apologize for interrupting, you triggered something in my mind that I recall now, something that I think initiated this thought in many ways, which was this idea, at the beginning, how do we sort of slow down? And in many ways, I think understand that life is very fleeting, and that a couple of years ago, I felt there were going to be gifts from this time. I didn't know what they were. And I used that word so lightly because I knew that there were going to be people that suffered personally, professionally. Unfortunately, I knew too many people that did not survive and have really struggled. But I thought that there was going to be something to be gained from it if we were open to it.
Yeah.
And so much of that then was driven by, okay, am I going to maybe look at things a little differently, step back, get out of my own head, which was really kind of the emphasis of the Unicorn You, which was step out of your own head, develop a path for being rather than doing, and understand the most important things in life. And that's what, perhaps if we were open to it, those were some of the gifts that came from this time.
Well, Josh, I absolutely agree with you. And I think, one of the most important things is that, again, we go back to reflection, but out of adversity, you do create what's important. And during the time, and I don't know, you probably know my story. I'm not sure if you do. I'll share just a little bit, if I may. But March 2020 and 21 for me was really challenging because not only were we locked down in COVID, but I was diagnosed with bowel cancer. So I had major surgery and then 12 rounds of chemo, which wasn't pleasant in any way whatsoever. But it actually, and again, when we're open to things, there is always gifts that come from the challenges that are thrown our way and how we deal with that. And I think for one of the things that I've learned from that is that, time in whatever you're doing is absolutely precious and irreplaceable. So when the two things that you can't replace, your time and your energy, really learn to be critical in how you use that. And I think for me, that's been one of the greatest gifts that's come out of COVID, cancer, and and these connections, because it just makes it makes so much sense to be considered in how you use your time and your energy.
I'm just sort of full of gratitude for you sharing that. I didn't know your story. And I can't imagine, really, I can't even truly begin to fathom to go through that at any time, let alone at that time. I hope that you feel as good as you look and are beyond the path to recovery. And you mentioned something else that in my introduction, I'm going to make a point to talk about this quite a bit next week. I always felt this idea that our family, our health were these two great commodities. And in March of 2020, I discovered the third much more acutely in its time.
Yeah.
And it goes back to exactly what we were talking about before. What am I going to do with this time? How are we going to appreciate it? How are we going to value it? How are we going to use our time perhaps differently? And those are great gifts and lessons you certainly impart in all your work, which I admire. And certainly this courage, and there's another R word, we talked about reflection, but resiliency is what you're talking about as well. And so I think the bravery is amazing, because to go through, again, I use the word almost confusing. It felt that way a little bit. We didn't know what was going to be. As you had mentioned to me before, to be locked down for over 300 days. Who could even process this? And perhaps we need some distance from this at some point to say, did this really happen? And for you, of course, you knew it happened. But I think for so many of us is that sometimes it takes some adversity to gain a greater sense of perspective and appreciation.
No, look, I think that's right. And I hope that people hold on to it, because I think there was a shift. And I hope, that gratitude, that reconnecting with family and, actually having to be in the home, not being out all the time, I think has created those positive connections. And I think that's allowed sort of certain things which maybe, weren't those family values. It's certainly, I know with our family, it's certainly, we've always been very strong, but this has totally honed us because we were on opposite sides of the world. So we couldn't actually, so thank goodness for technology, like we have now, we're talking in opposite sides of the world as clearly as possible. But well, look, it's a time that we can all learn from if
no question.
We're open to it.
And I love something you mentioned. I'm sorry about
please.
About holding on to it.
Yeah.
I think that is so critical. And I was reminded of that very thing this past weekend. This past Sunday for us here in the States was the, 21st anniversary of 9/11.
Oh, of course.
And for so many people in the States, I think, there's been some distance, of course, with that.
Yeah.
But for those that really go back to it and are able to hold on to that memory, it's really that feeling. Yeah. I think it's you never want to lose. In many ways, the sadness and that that memory is something you want to use to your advantage.
Yeah.
And to really try to hold on to exactly as you were saying. So that was just one last thing I wanted to add, because I think that's so important. Too often we have a very short memory because we're eager to move on to the next thing. We don't want to hear of anything bad or negative. And certainly focusing on the positive is essential in our level of optimism. But we can use that experience of maybe some adversity to help us as well.
Yeah, and I really like that point, because and also connecting it to that kinesthetic, because that's what really drives when you're moving into those stages of growth.
Right.
So that's a really, really valuable point, really valuable point. So share with our members, what will they learn from your presentation at the NLP Global Summit?
Next week, I'm so excited to speak with everyone, to meet everyone. I really love the interaction. I love getting feedback. And what I'd like to share is really just a high-level presentation and overview of the unicorn in you, because I really believe that these principles that I'm going to outline are universal. And they're the types of values that we can all use and implement in our lives. And I'm going to try to share some actionable ways we can do that. But I would love to make it more of a conversation as much as a presentation. But we're going to be talking about kindness and gratitude, integrity, humility, and acceptance. We're going to focus on those 5 things. We're going to talk about how they apply to your business, how to use them better in your business, but really just how to use these principles in our lives, our daily lives, to bring us closer to peace and joy, which makes us better business people and just better human beings in general.
Beautiful. I'm really, really excited. Really looking forward to it. There's some incredible speakers. And will you be bringing some unicorns along with you?
You're the only unicorn that I know is confirmed to attend, but I'm hopeful that we'll get many others. Actually, I hear attendance is unbelievable right now. It's a great lineup. I've seen that. I am so amazed with what you have done to create this summit. I think it's so needed. I think it's so important. And in many ways, I'm a believer that collaboration and bringing together, and that we all are in this together. I think this is really just a celebration of this industry, this life, and all the work that you do. And so the NLP Global Summit is going to be a wonderful event. I'm thrilled to be a very, very small part of it.
So why is it important for you to be part of the NLP Global Summit?
You know, I think just getting out this message is very important. I recently did a media appearance where the interviewer was on a morning television show here in the States, and he asked me, what's important to get started with? You outlined 5 key principles. Should we talk about kindness? Should we talk about this? And I said, you know what? I think that we can never have enough kindness. And so it's important for me to be part of this, because sometimes these very simple, straightforward messages are so critical and significant to people because we forget them so easily. And what I love about them is that they're all accessible. And so that's why it was important for me to be part of this, because I just want to continue sharing this message of unicorns, of aspirational potential, and of kindness, and also of gratitude and integrity and humility and acceptance, things that I think we can all use more of.
I love that, Josh. I love that. And what would you say to someone thinking about registering for the NLP Global Summit?
I would definitely encourage it, and certainly not for me, but for this wonderful lineup. And I think that there is a spirit of sharing that, from what I can tell from all of the speakers and those that are going to be over these few days, I think it's so important to come out and be a part of it. In many ways, I think there's a social contract that exists between all of us that gets forgotten. And I think that in our profession, in this industry, it's important to participate and just to kind of raise your hand, show up, be part of it. You never know who you're going to meet and what you're going to take away. And so I really, really advise and encourage everyone to sign up. It's going to be the best investment you make all year.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course, to just sign up, it is actually free. I mean, obviously you can upgrade and you can come and join the Q&As with us, but to actually get access to the NLP Global Summit, then our registration is completely free. But just before we do conclude, going back to your point, I mean, we are completely humbled by the caliber of speakers who have joined together. And I'm sort of relatively new to this industry, but I've spent 34 years in the food industry, and we have very strong collaborations in the food industry. and relationships that have been built over all those years. Competition isn't seen as we manufacture the same products, therefore we can't talk to you. It's more, we manufacture the same products, therefore how can we help each other? And I think for me, the thing which is really exciting me and has really grown certainly over the last couple of weeks, is that the caliber of speakers and the experience that is going to be in this summit is absolutely phenomenal. And I love the fact that we're actually collaborating, we're bringing this together. And to your point, I'm just so excited to be able to talk to people, create these connections, and I'm so excited to see where this leads from here, especially in an industry which has been unregulated. The people that are giving their time to be part of this summit are saying, here I am, this is what I do, how can we help each other?
And that's exactly it. You've created an environment where there's a spirit of sharing. And like you, I come from the business world. There is always a sense of perhaps it's a zero-sum game, or perhaps I'm afraid to share anything. But I think actually we all gain when we do that. We even gain when we share. And certainly for those that are able to receive that, I think that you've created an event that caters to everyone. And I think that's so important, regardless of level. And it makes everyone feel welcome. And so whether you're a veteran of this industry, whether you're new to it, whether you're curious, I just love that you've made it accessible to everyone by having a free event to come and learn, share. And again, you're going to meet someone, you're going to learn, and you're going to continue to grow and develop as a person and as a business.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited for the next 7 days. I think it's going to be wonderful. Josh Kramer, thank you so much for joining me. It's been absolutely wonderful to chat with you. I'm pretty sure we could chat all day, but I'm sure that you have an evening and dinner to go to, and I have a day to get set into. So look forward to seeing you next week. And thank you so much for joining me for the NLP Global Summit interview series. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Fram. Can't wait for next week.
Thanks, Josh. See you.